for. Several years ago, while I was teaching at New Hampstead High School, I introduced a set of vocabulary words to my students. I asked students to form groups and assigned them the task of discussing the words, coming up with their own definitions and an illustration for each term. As I circulated the room, I checked on a group of 3 students who were not native English speakers. 3 girls were immigrants, 2 from Mexico and the 3rd from Guatemala. As I looked at their work, I became concerned with one of the definitions they had come up with and the corresponding image they had created. Next to the words mean, angry, scary people, the students had drawn a set of ferocious stick figures. At the top of the page was the vocabulary word I'd assigned, patriot. It did not take a great deal of reflection for me to understand the root of their misconception. These students were brought to this country at an early age by parents who, fleeing poverty and violence, came to the United States in search of a better life for their children. During these girls' formative years, their plight became a central debate within American politics. In 2007, 2009, 2010, and 2011, members of Congress attempted unsuccessfully to pass a bill that would give young undocumented immigrants, or dreamers as they would be called, the opportunity to attend college, join the military, seek employment, or generally just live their lives free of the fear of deportation. The controversy heightened even further in 2012 when President Obama, frustrated by Congress's inaction, created the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or DACA policy, by signing an executive order offering hope to young undocumented immigrants. As this topic was debated in the news and in the public square, these young girls saw and heard hateful rhetoric that attempted to scare the American public by depicting undocumented immigrants as dangerous criminals and societal leeches. And the people who espoused this xenophobic hate proudly called themselves patriots, or more specifically at the time, Tea Party patriots. And they were clear to denounce anyone who disagreed with their racist rhetoric as unpatriotic. It still breaks my heart to think that these 3 girls were raised in a nation whose political climate was so toxic that instead of associating the word patriot with love for one's nation, they instead associated it with hatred for those who come to this nation in search of a better life. I realize now, however, that defining patriotism is a task that is difficult not only for 3 students learning English as a second language, it is a term that many of us struggle to comprehend. What exactly does it mean to be patriotic? That's a question I've wrestled with all my life. I grew up in a home where it felt like I was getting mixed signals. My father, who came of age a little after the peace movement of the 1960s, but fancied himself a hippie nonetheless, taught me to be distrustful of my government, to question its policies, and to protest injustice. But that same hippie had also followed in the family tradition of serving in the military. And so I was also taught to have a deep respect for those who serve in uniform. My mother, a military spouse, shared that sense of respect for our servicemen and women. But as an Indigenous person, she also instilled within me that although I am an American, I am an Indigenous American. And my identity as an Indigenous person and as a Natchez Cuso Indian is not superseded by my identity as an American. In fact, my tribal identity and my identity as an Indigenous person existed before this land was ever called America. Over the years, this caused me to struggle with what I perceived patriotism to be. On Independence Day and at other times, I wanted to join in with the fireworks and the nationalistic fervor. I wanted to believe in as well as to proclaim our nation's exceptionalism. But the independent thinker that my father raised had a difficult time boasting of America's greatness and ignoring its past and present injustice. As an Indigenous person, I couldn't be an enthusiastic cheerleader for the nation that was built on my people's oppression. As much as I wanted to join the parade of patriotism, I could never quite keep in step with the drumbeat of American nationalism. Maybe you have had that same struggle throughout the years. As Unitarian Universalists, our fourth principle calls us toward a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. As independent thinkers, we tend to question our nation's policies, actions, and its character, both today and throughout history. So you may find yourself questioning whether or not you feel comfortable joining the red, white, and blue cheerleading squad. If you're not exactly sure how you fit in as an independence thinker on Independence Day, first, let me say, you are not alone. A few weeks ago, we celebrated Juneteenth, National Independence Day. Although celebrated for over a century and a half by African Americans, this year was only the second year Juneteenth was a national holiday. I must say, I found it refreshing to celebrate an Independence Day that does not spark a sense of cognitive dissonance within me. It felt good a few weeks ago to watch the fireworks go off in downtown Savannah and to know they were not celebrating the signing of a document that calls me a merciless savage. A document that was entitled a Declaration of Independence, despite leaving millions of people enslaved. Last year, when the bill to make Juneteenth a national holiday was voted on by the House of Representatives, it was passed with mostly bipartisan support, receiving 415 yay votes. The 14 representatives who voted against the bill claimed they were not opposed to the holiday in itself, but the inclusion of the words National Independence Day in the holiday's official title. Representative Chip Roy of Texas voiced his opposition, claiming this name needlessly divides our nation by creating a separate Independence Day based on the color of one's skin. If only Representative Roy were here, I would love to explain to him that it is quite possible to celebrate freedom from the metaphorical slavery of British rule on July 4th and also celebrate freedom from literal slavery on June 19th. There's no need to pick one or the other, Chip. You can do both. And I would also like to add that there would have been no need for a second Independence Day if the first Independence Day had actually been a day of independence for all Americans and not just those that resemble you, Chip. But for many people, my admission that I am comfortable celebrating Juneteenth, National Independence Day, while I struggle cognitively with the celebration of July 4th, Independence Day, means that I am un-American. If that is the case, this un-American American stands in the company of many great Americans. Americans like Frederick Douglass, who when asked to give a speech at an event commemorating the 76th anniversary of the nation, had the opportunity to express the hypocrisy of celebrating Independence Day while his people remained enslaved. Excuse me. During this speech, he famously declared, "What to the American slave is your 4th of July? To him, your celebration is a sham, your boasted liberty an unholy license, your national greatness a swelling vanity, your shouts of liberty and equality, hollow mockery, your prayers and hymns, your sermons and thanksgiving, with all your religious parade and solemnity are to him mere bombast, fraud, deception, impiety, and hypocrisy." Some may argue that Douglas's words, spoken at a time when chattel slavery was legal in much of the country, no longer ring true today. And though I'll concede that tremendous progress has been made since 1852, I'm not sure Douglas's speech would have been all that different if given today. According to the Sentencing Project, Black Americans are 5 times more likely to be incarcerated than white Americans, more likely to be arrested, once arrested, more likely to be convicted, and once convicted, more likely to experience lengthy prison sentences. Black Americans make up 13% of the population, but 38% of the prison population and 40% of people on death row. The average African-American worker earns 62% of the average white worker. And despite being the most well-educated demographic, Black women earn 66% of the income of a typical white male. We often speak of the days of redlining and housing discrimination as a remnant of a bygone era, when in fact the Black to white home ownership gap is greater today than it was 50 years ago. Over a century after Frederick Douglass's scathing 4th of July speech, Dr. King called out the nation's hypocrisy, saying, "There are two Americas. One America is beautiful for situation. In this America, millions of people have the milk of prosperity and the honey of equality flowing before them. In this America, children grow up in the sunlight of opportunity. But there is another America. This other America has a daily ugliness about it that transforms the buoyancy of hope into the fatigue of despair." Although revered today, when Dr. King made speeches like this and others offering an honest assessment of our nation's condition, he was accused of being a communist, labeled as un-American. It's a common tactic well used by the enemies of progress throughout the years to hijack the concept of patriotism and to brand themselves as the real patriots, calling into question the patriotism of anyone who disagrees with them. In reality, Dr. King's words were the furthest thing from un-American. There is nothing unpatriotic about calling out injustice in our nation. In fact, in his final speech, Dr. King expressed patriotism like none other when he called on America to be true to what you said on paper. Dr. King could have denounced America's founding documents as worthless pieces of paper full of lies and unkept promises. Instead, he uplifted this nation's founding documents and called upon the nation to live up to the promises upon which the nation was founded. That is love for country. That is patriotism. That is what we are called upon to do today. At a time when we look around the nation, and instead of feeling a sense of nationalistic pride, we feel anger and shame, call upon this nation to live up to its promises. As a patriotic American who is angry and emotionally exhausted about gun violence in this country, I call upon this nation to live up to what it said on paper. The papers tell me that we were founded on a belief that we're endowed with an unalienable right to life. Even the paper upon which the often cited Second Amendment was penned begins with the words, "a well-regulated militia." Let's call upon our nation to live up to what we wrote on paper and get some common sense gun regulations put into place. I'm still in shock that the rights of women were just rolled back half a century, stripping women of their bodily autonomy. As a patriotic American on the eve of Independence Day, I call upon America to live up to what you put on paper, the paper of your 14th Amendment. Nor shall any state deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. No woman should have to travel to another state to make decisions about her own body and reproductive health. Live up to what you put on paper, America. When I was a teenager, my family moved into a small house out in the country. It's terrifying. I found mice all throughout the house the first night I lived there. I stayed up all night with a broom in my hand. About a quarter of a mile away from that tiny little house in the middle of a field where mice flooded in was a very large farmhouse where two older women, a mother and a daughter, lived. My mother, though not a very social person by nature, got to know the women and spent time helping them around their house, even cooking for them as their health declined. The two women died, first the mother and the daughter about a year later. Soon thereafter, a man came to my parents' door and expressed his gratitude for the kindness my mother showed to his mother and sister over the years, and as a token of his appreciation, offered my parents for a very reasonable price the house and several acres of land that included a pecan orchard. He even offered to finance the house at no interest. My dad, of course, took him up on the offer, and they soon moved out of their small home into a large 5-bedroom home with a living room and parlor and wraparound front porch. It was their dream home, but it was not without flaws. Over the years, the two women had allowed the house to fall into some disrepair. The ceiling needed repair, causing damage to many of the rooms. The flaws in the home, however, did not stop my parents from loving the house. Likewise, my parents' love for the house did not cause them to ignore the flaws. In contrast, their love for the home motivated them to put in the work to fix the damage. 10 years after moving in, they've improved the house dramatically. The roof is repaired, the porch is sturdy, the kitchen, living room, dining room, and 4 bedrooms have been completely remodeled, and yet they are still working. I hope to live to see the day the final bedroom and the parlor are finished. But even when that does happen, my dad will still continue to work because he loves that house. One day I'm going to inherit that old house. And when I do, I will continue the tradition, maybe replacing part of that tin roof with some solar panels. I'll continue the tradition because I will love the house just as much as my parents do. Our nation is kind of like that house. We inherited this old house, and it's a great old house, but it has some flaws. Recognizing the work that needs to be done doesn't diminish our love for the house. And our love for the house doesn't blind us to the fact that the place needs some fixing up. We can even go further than that. We can love the house and admit that the house was built on stolen land and that it was built by slave labor. We can love the house and work to pay restitution for the injustice upon which it was built. We can love the house we have inherited and still say to other people in need of refuge, our door is open. In fact, this house is full of people who moved here in search of a better place to live. Sometimes, just as soon as we get one thing fixed in the house, something else falls apart. 6 stooges in robes may tear down a part of the structure that stood for 50 years. Insurrectionists might try to tear the whole thing down. But we love the house, so we're not moving out. We put in the work, we put in the money. We're going to make it into the house we know it can be, because it's our house and we love it. Amen, and may it be so. And I invite you, as I play this last song, if you know it, and I'm sure you all do, sing along.
I'm from danger, I'm around warning, I'm around love between my brothers and my sisters, all over this land. Ooh, Michael, beautiful, I ring it in the morning, I ring it in the evening, all over this land. I ring out danger, I ring out a warning, I ring out love between my brothers and my sisters, all over this land. If I had a song, I'd sing it in the morning, I'd sing it in the evening, all over this land. I'd sing out danger, I'd sing out a warning, I'd sing out love between my brothers and my sisters, all over this land. Ooh, I got a hammer, and I got a bell, and I got a song to sing, all over this land. It's the hammer of justice, it's the bell of freedom, it's the song about love between my brothers and my sisters, all over this land. It's the hammer of justice, it's the bell of freedom, it's the song about love between my brothers and my sisters, all over this land.
If you have any joys or concerns you'd like to share with the congregation,